Welcome back, everybody, to day 27. We love day 27 so much, we're having it again since I mistakenly identified yesterday as day 27. But
What day
27 is
is it?
it's a great number. Vladimir Guerrero wore that for the Angels for years. So that's why I love the number 27. But today is the real day 27. So good day to everybody. Before we came on, Penny and I were both talking about a book that we've been reading, an advanced copy of Clint Smith's How the Word is Passed. And before we started recording, we just started talking about the book. I'm just begun. The foreword is him visiting New Orleans and recognizing the history of the slave trade and the racism there. And then each subsequent chapter is he's visiting a place in the country and looking at through the lens of equity. In chapter 1, he visits Thomas Jefferson's home. And I already learned, I knew Jefferson had slaves, but I didn't know to the degree. I didn't know that they sold, I know that was done widely, Penny, but I didn't know that Jefferson intentionally at times separated families, ripped kids from their parents. I have to say it's an ignorant part of my background. And I know the book is being released in June, but I just wanted to say that a lot of times we come on here and we talk about reading and writing, but today we just want to talk about the world that we're teaching in, and I think what that means for us as ELA teachers.
Well, and I think even just as teachers, one thing you asked me today in an email was, what are you reading professionally? Because teachers read professionally. This is one of a stack of books that I am reading to learn the history I was never taught. And, Clint Smith, who's coming on our book club this summer to talk about his book of poetry, I just adore him. But I think when I talked about this book before, I said poets should always write history books because the language it's compelling. It's not just that you're learning, but I just want to read this one excerpt. He's talking about people who are on this tour with him. Donna and Grace and so many people, specifically white people, often have understood slavery and those held in its grip only in abstract terms. They do not see the faces. They cannot picture the hands. They do not hear the fear or the laughter. They do not consider that these were children like their own, or that these were people who had birthdays and weddings and funerals, who loved and celebrated one another just as they loved and celebrated their loved ones. It's that, to me, why isn't this going to be an essential book in American history classrooms? Because he's taking, I'm a modern day, I'm going on a tour of downtown Boston was one of the chapters I just finished because I'm on the last one right now. And all of the students that are currently in schools could do those kinds of things at some point in their life. They could visit, right, a place and see it differently based on who the tour guide is, right? Because you see that over the course of the book, that the tour guides are either willing to outright address what happened in this place or they avoid it. And the people on the tour get that glimpse of what the education should be. And that's what I think is happening in our schools. They get a glimpse, they get this little tossed off reference to something instead of the way slavery still impacts our country.
We did not talk about this, but I actually was listening to a Jon Stewart interview earlier today in which he talked about growing up in Long Island and how his parents and the neighbors, when they came out of World War II, grandparents, they were given the GI Bill. They were given reduced rates on buying houses, getting into houses, interest rates, but that the legislation was intentionally excluded people of color. And so now people who live there now, some of them have this attitude, well, when you look at people who aren't doing as well in society, all you need to do is pull up your bootstraps and go to school and study. And they do not understand the history that was legislated
Mhm.
to put people behind the eight ball and to ensure that they stay in poverty situations. And I think, that's a lot of this context is really helping me to understand that. And it just feels like such an important time in education history, in our country's history, that things that the consciousness on teachers like me are beginning to be, awoken. And it makes how I would go back into the classroom, it really, hold that, and then dial in a little bit of pandemic there.
Mhm.
And now you have this, I think, disruption that is going to turn into something when we go back to school in the fall. And the question is, what is that going to turn into?
Right. I mean, I think that your idea that there should be a disruption, right? Like when Mike Matsuda said they're going to have all this Biden money, what's going to be done with it? Because I was just driven thinking about the Institute for Racial Equity and Literacy, which Dr. Sonia Cherry-Paul and Tricia Abarvia started at UNH 3 years ago. This is the third one coming up. And I put a link to that in yesterday's talk with Izzy, because I think it's such a powerful experience. And I'm actually going to sign up and do the Structures and Systems Week in the summer. It follows our book club, because I really spent a lot of time on the reflecting on my own history with them when I was part of it in 2019. But I think, both of us feel ignorant, that we're not as skilled in understanding and studying what our colleagues know better than we do. So how do we talk about it? But I also feel that all teachers need to reckon with this. We need to be reading, we need to be thinking. It's why we have taken the focus we have for the last 2 years in our summer book club, is to really try to reckon with, Frederick Joseph's The Black Friend, How to Be a Better White Person, is the book we're going to study for 2 weeks. It's a pretty powerful look at what do we not know. But I started making a list, right? So if we're going to change some things in education, right? What would they be? And so one of the first things I wrote down was stop standardized testing as measures of student learning. They are oversimplifications of student potential. I include the SAT and the ACT. They are always characterized as so important in state level tests, but they tend to be completely biased. They have such a limited understanding of the brilliance that's inside of a kid. And so you get a kid who feels like they're a failure in reading year after year after year. But as I said to my economic council in my town one year, nobody sits down and asks that kid to read to them and then asks them what they understand about what they've read. That's not what you're looking at. That's not what this data is, right? So why can't we get rid of all of that?
Well, I mean, I think of an old expression a guy in my district, Jim Cox, said years ago. He coined this acronym, WITty-WIG, and WITty-WIG stands for what you test is what you get. And so the problem with standardized tests, the problems with those kinds of tests, is that they drive a certain kind of teaching, right? They value only a certain kind of thinking. That standardized tests create standardized thinkers. And years ago, one of the reasons I was motivated to write Redecide was because my very privileged daughters, both in AP classes, I saw how AP almost destroyed their love of reading forever, right? And I think here in California, they've done studies where they have found that the AP scores really are not an indicator versus other indicators of just how well kids are going to do once they get to college.
Well, and many schools no longer allow AP scores to take you out of freshman comp, for example, because you didn't study writing across all different disciplines. But my daughter had the same experience. In fact, she was going to be an English major. Senior year, she took AP Lit. She said to me at the end of the course, there is no way I'm majoring in English if that's what people value in English. And I was like, no. She didn't major in English.
Yeah, I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with teaching to the test if the test is a good test. But if the test is a bad test and it drives everything, to me, test to me would be more portfolio, right?
Right. No, that's what I put down. Replace it with a portfolio where kids have multiple attempts to get something right, like in the world. But the other piece is it's not just, I'm not trying to pick on AP. What I was thinking about with AP is there are always these gates to getting in. You can only have 2 sections. So you're only going to allow X number of kids. So then you've got all of this, like all of it is bad. Tracking is bad. Tracking does not serve kids well. And so when kids are general level this and general level that, it doesn't inspire them.
And I know in your old high school, right, at Kennett, that everybody took 9th grade. And I think we mentioned this in the previous session a little bit, but everybody took 9th grade. And then after 9th grade, 10, 11, and 12 were mixed and everything was elective, right?
Yeah, so you could elect to take AP Lit, right? And most advanced kids that took that, right? There weren't very many general students who did, but it really drove some interesting questions in our department. There was a point when a department member said, I don't want anyone to approve a general level student for the Shakespeare course. And we were all like, are you kidding me? Shakespeare wrote for regular people, right? And if you can't adapt the teaching to that, we shouldn't be offering the course, because there is an elitism that kind of seeps into some teaching. And I think that that in itself is part of what we talk about when we talk about white supremacy. Who do the systems serve and who is not served well? And if it's not serving all kids, then why is it in place?
The gatekeeping is really problematic. Who gets into honors classes, who, you know, and some of that's like 3rd and 4th grade, because once you're in that track, you stay in that track.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I would add one thing that needs to change. And I was thinking about the conversation we had with David a couple of days ago about how he had a course called 200 pages.
No, 20,000 words.
Oh, excuse me, 20,000 words. I was saying it backwards.
Yeah.
And how, you know, kids are asked to write 20,000 words in a semester.
Mm-hmm.
I think the sister course to that, and I've already tipped my hand, but the sister course to that would be, you know, 20 books.
Yeah.
Like, let's have a class that the stated goal of everybody in the class is to read 20 books.
Yeah, I was thinking about a book club winner years ago who started a course that was all designed around that big idea. And then he had 5 sections of it before long, because kids loved it. Volume, right? The chance to talk to other kids, book clubs. I have one for you.
You know what? Let me say this, because this just came to me. When I first started teaching 35 years ago, we had tracks, we had low tracks, right? And I forget the name of the course, but there was a remedial reading class. I actually taught it. That's how I was hired, right? But we also offered sort of this lollipop out here. And I remember it was called Power Reading. And it was for people who like to read. And they just went in that, and guess who took the class? You know, as kids who love to read and were always surrounded by books. But if you keep them separate all the time, you're never going to make the, you know, and what happened in the remedial reading classes, and I would even venture to say in my own classes when I taught, when I first started and didn't know what the hell I was doing, is that those kids are slowed down, right? Because they're not as proficient. So we must slow down. It took me many years to figure out those kids need twice as much, not half as much, right? But that gatekeeping is just insidious.
Well, and I also think that it's false. That's my bigger problem with it, is that you are putting a label on a kid that has nothing to do with their potential or their willingness. And I also added in, we need flexible hours, counseling and teaching. So teachers should be on different schedules, because some kids need to work. In my town, they needed to work. And they should have a schedule where they could see the guidance counselor in the evening with their parents if they needed to. And we always had these like strict, everybody leaves the building by 2:30, 3 o'clock. It just doesn't fit modern kids, right? Or all kids.
I've had more than one principal who said, the bell rings at the end of the day at 2:40, everybody off campus, let's get the campus swept and cleaned. And these kids are being swept into neighborhoods where, their apartments are crowded, or,
Yeah.
And then I had one principal, Robert Kennard, who said, no, let's keep them here as long as we can and welcome them and make school a place where they want to be after school, where they want to be before school.
Well, and I was also thinking, I was watching Morning Joe the other day, and Joe Scarborough went on this rant about how teachers unions were preventing kids from coming back to school. And I was so angry because people don't see how different facilities are unless you actually work in schools. I worked in a school that was horrible shape. We had journalism in the wood shop. We had one course sitting behind auto that always smelled like exhaust, one tiny little conference room that had 25 kids in it. They don't see that right now there are teachers who don't want to go back to school because there's no ventilation. There's never been soap in the bathroom. So how about if we start with some basic things, like every school should be a beautiful, inviting place, and it should be safe. Talking to Izzy when she said her school sits with all these freeways around it and all these kids that have asthma. And, these are things that Jonathan Kozol wrote about in the 80s. It's not like we didn't know, right? But how about free breakfast and lunch for every single kid who wants it? And it's good food. They served stuff that was so awful because that's what the government allotted at my school sometimes. People were trying to make it good, but it wasn't healthy.
So for the younger teachers watching this today, I would go back and say, look at Savage Inequalities, Jonathan Kozol's book about savage inequalities, and that there is educational apartheid in this country still. And if you don't believe that, go read his book. I will say where I work, the Anaheim Union High School District did a remarkable job in the pandemic of stepping up and continuing to feed people, continuing to feed students and sometimes their families as well.
How about if we eliminate policing in schools, eliminate in-school suspension? If we start looking, I was thinking about David's schools. You have parents, you have students and teachers all on a group project of what kind of curriculum instruction are we looking for? Schools can solve problems like that. They can solve problems, right? If you step away from everything's about compliance, then you can step away from always punishing kids.
Well, I mean, the whole punishment angle is a big topic. I mean, anytime I had a kid misbehave, I had to stop back and really question what I'm doing.
Yep.
And again, how you handle something like that, I think is really important. But I think you've also touched on a lot of times, the suspension thing is ridiculous. Off-campus suspension is even worse, right? You've misbehaved, so we'll go home for 3 days. When you're already disconnected from school, it's like a reward almost. But I think, coming back to reimagining post-pandemic what a school day looks like, what a school week looks like, that maybe kids are in class on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I mean, maybe there's other days or internship days or other days where they're in research modes. I love the idea that Izzy talked about, and I think Mike Matsuda talked about, that a quarter or semester or a year might be wrapped around one problem that students are interested in trying to solve. So, climate change or mass incarceration or whatever that is, and they're getting that in different content areas and a project-based approach that's across the curriculum. I think
that drives critical thinking and collaboration and communication and creativity. I mean, I told you that is the freshman year seminar at my college, is one of those tackling a wicked problem. So this is college prep as well. This is life prep.
So if I'm in that class, what's that like?
Well, my students, they're in all different ones. So we oftentimes will talk about, what are you learning? What are you thinking about? And the professors are great about helping students frame, what part of this problem do you want to work on? Who do you want to work with? So if you're in the tackling a wicked problem climate change class, you might be working on solar energy and projects that bring it to more places, or you might be working on something else entirely, like vegetarianism. But I think what I like is that you're taking the idea of inquiry and research and moving it into this is happening now. The mass incarceration class, I just absolutely loved. I love the guy who teaches it. And I have looked so much at the curriculum that they're teaching just to influence some of the infographics I bring in. And, it creates an energy on campus when you're starting to do innovative things. Didn't you find that? Like we talk about when you don't know exactly how it's going to go, it kind of lifts your energy for the day, for the class. There's one other one that I think is really important, and that is that teachers have always been out there buying their own books, paying for their own conferences, tracking down PD that matters, and oftentimes having little support from school. And if the federal government's going to be effective in education, why aren't they opening up conferences at the federal level, paying for presenters in every state, for NCTE to operate in all these different states, so the teachers have places to go that are paid for? Because teachers are hungry to learn, but you can't always put it on teachers. Like my summer book club, how many people in that book club, I bet you, will have paid for every bit of it themselves?
I mean, I think about a teacher like you, who's about as highly motivated as any teacher I've ever met. But how many times have you walked out of NCTE going, oh my God, I'm recharged?
Oh, every single, and it would I'd write it for months. I would have my notebook, I'd look back at it and be like, yes, I'm going to try that. It is absolutely, I think for every teacher to go to a national conference every other year, every few years, these are things that are possible. But, when I took it, I asked for money from our economic council, and all the business leaders said, well, this is how professionals work. We pay to send our people to conferences. Of course, I'm going to support this. But that's hard. I had to, schedule time and make a presentation and get out there begging to take my colleagues to NCTE. I just think we have to make that easier. Teachers want to be a part of something bigger than just what they see in the halls of their school.
And so that's where maybe teacher advocacy starts, knowing that your district is going to receive additional funding. I think teachers need to get in the ear of the decision makers and talk about many of the things that we've been talking about today. I mean, if I want to circle back around, and we won't go down this trail too far because we've talked about this many times, but what are they reading, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've had teachers say to me, well, I'd love to do book clubs, but nobody's funding them for me. Right. And so I think this is the time before that money is spent, before it's earmarked for other things. This is the time to get in and say, hey, this is what my kids need.
Absolutely. And this is what young teachers need to stay in our profession, right? We're going to see a 30% loss, they said on NPR today, of healthcare workers who say they can't come back. It's just been exhausting. And people have projected that about teaching. They've had this unprecedented number of retirements. And I just think, we need every good teacher to stay. How do we do that? We got to support them.
Adopt a new one.
That's
I mean, I was super fortunate that early in my career, I just sided up to somebody and said, I'm going to bother the hell out of you, and you're going to support me when I'm melting down. So that is the case. Wow. So that's it, right? Just change the curriculum, fund more,
policing.
Get rid of standardized testing. But I think all of this circles back around to how hard it is to be a teacher and how hard it is to be a teacher in a pandemic. But coming out of that pandemic, I do believe there is opportunity here for change. And I know this whole conversation started, Penny and I started talking before we came on today, because we just feel so unsettled about what's happening in our country right now, that to just kind of go back to our classrooms and kind of teach the same way, the same books, the same curriculum all the time, it just feels wrong to me.
Well, like Izzy said, she wouldn't avoid the topic with her fifth graders because she asks them, what's your news? I love that. What's your news, from Sarah's book? And that idea that some of the kids want to talk about it, and we have to have the courage to lead, which means we have to learn more. Because I know we both don't feel prepared to lead discussions of racial equity. I want them to not hire us. I want people to hire people of color to come in and guide those discussions. But we also have to keep reading ourselves. There's some of it that we just have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks for listening to our rant today.
We have a great guest tomorrow. I can't wait.
Tomorrow, we're actually going to step out of our lane a little bit. We're going to bring in, wait for it, a math teacher
Superb math teacher
who has kids do a lot of math. And so we look forward to introducing her to you tomorrow. And until then, thanks for hanging out with us again, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye, everybody.